So one of the things that's pretty remarkable about America in the decades before the war, millions of people immigrate here. Many of those people are doing what immigrants have done throughout history, which is looking for a better opportunity. They're willing to uproot their lives and to move somewhere else to try to find something that's better than what they know.
The truth is, over the 20 to 25 years prior to the American Civil War, there were waves not just of Irish, but by the 1850s, the German influx had actually exceeded the Irish, and then there's this massive wave of Scandinavian immigrants, mostly people coming from Norway and Sweden, but some from Finland, some from Denmark, and it really reshapes the country, particularly the North. The vast majority of immigrants, probably 75–80% of them, settle in the North because there's a free labor market. They don't go to the South because the slavery system that existed in the antebellum South sucked up almost all jobs.
Many of those populations have enclaves in states for generations after they've immigrated here. What you see happen is there's not the kind of state-centric identity that's been built in the South. The idea of Robert E. Lee saying, "I'm a Virginian, I can never go against my country," and to him his country is Virginia. I think the immigrant experience is largely they came to the United States, and they're going to then figure out where they can build their lives.
A lot of the Irish tended to congregate in cities, but Germans and Scandinavians begin moving out to what was then the West, what we would call the Midwest. Some of them are relatively new states. These areas are not only very rural, they're very agricultural, and they're very ethnic. There are some places in the North where English isn't even being spoken as the primary language. Today, a lot of people think these people were just all getting off the boats in 1862 and 63 and being conscripted into the U.S. Army. There was some of that, but many of these people had lived here for a decade or 20 years. They had come here perhaps in their 20s, their children were born here, or their children had immigrated here with them when they were very young. This had become home. This was their country. Especially among the Germans, there was anti-slavery sentiment. They were extraordinarily pro-union, but all of them had come from areas where the monarchy, princes, kings and queens had abused them. It's not a stretch for them to see that what they had left was potentially beginning to emerge here in the South.
And I think a great many of them identify with the power struggle that's going on, especially when they think about the institution of slavery. The idea that if you were a farmer in Ireland and for generations you've tried to farm your land and you've never gotten ahead, you've never been able to do anything but scrape by, and that's what you did, that's what your parents did, that's what your children are going to do. At some point I think they innately understand that slaves are working. Generationally there's wealth and power that is accumulated for one group of people, and another group of people is never able to escape that.
Religion is soaked into almost everything in some way in the human experience. Among Irish immigrants, for example, the vast majority of them were Roman Catholic. Now, the Germans, there were some Catholics, but most Germans were Lutherans, and Scandinavians are almost exclusively Lutheran. And it's so different than the religious fervor that exists in the South among Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and Baptists. They don't use, especially among the immigrants, religion is not what is calling them. God isn't sending them on this crusade, which Claiborne argued that that was what was being done. It wasn't a religious crusade. This was, for many immigrants, a very simple thing. The country was imperiled by rebellion, and they believed it had to be saved. They had come to the United States for a new future, a new home, and they had this opportunity. And when the President of the United States put out the call for volunteers, they enlisted by the hundreds of thousands.
We have to look back at what was going on at the time. We want to ascribe all these reasons why people might fight. And I think it's very instructive to remember that Lincoln calls for troops to save the Union, and they enlist. That's remarkable, and there's no reason why we shouldn't think that they served because they wanted to save the Union. There's no reason to think that they were unaware of the politics of slavery, and they didn't care about the issue. I think that in the aggregate, we have to believe that the politics of the time informed their decision. We can talk about their motives for serving, for fighting, but when you just look at the raw numbers, just in the Irish immigrants, it's something like 10-1 in terms of serving the United States Army versus the Confederacy.
For example, here at the Battle of Franklin, there is a regiment, the 183rd Ohio, brand new unit, Some of the guys had just been mustered in a couple of weeks before the battle, and they're positioned on a secondary or reserve line not far from the Carter House, and they find themselves heavily engaged. They take about 125 casualties, but many of those guys were not just immigrants from Bavaria, Prussia, different German states. Many of them couldn't speak English. I mean, they had bilingual company commanders. Some of them certainly had signed up for a bounty. There was some money to be made. That's nothing new in the US military. But some of them signed up because they believed the country needed them. I think that's a pretty noble endeavor, to lay down your life, not just for the country, but to lay down your life for your new country. Albert Lotz had come from Saxony, Germany, in the late 1840s, and he had settled initially, lived in Ohio, but he and his wife moved to Franklin in the mid-1850s, and they get caught up in the Battle of Franklin. They and their children sought refuge in the Carter House basement on the night of the battle. But Lotz is an oddity. In a county where the population was about 22 or 23,000, there were about 150 foreign-born people living in this county. Albert Lotz and his family are very much on an island, and they were Lutherans. Let me assure you, there wasn't a Lutheran church in this town, so even their practice of religion was impacted. And like a lot of people, a lot of immigrants who lived in the South, I don't know that they were terribly welcomed, and they were never very much part of society. In fact, Moscow Carter at one point mentioned how they largely kept to themselves. And then after the war, they left. They join up with the great American exodus west to get out of these war-torn, socially ripped areas of the South, and he sought a new future in California.
One of the things that the war does is that it comes to immigrants as well as Americans who had been here. So you're the Lotz family, and you're living in a small village of 750 people, and all of a sudden the war comes to your front door. And it doesn't matter if you were originally born in Germany or if you were originally born in Tennessee, all of a sudden it's here where you live.